Fiona Beale was the kind of teacher everyone trusted, soft-spoken, patient, and adored by her students. But behind her gentle smile and perfectly organized classroom, she was hiding a horrifying secret. The body of her missing boyfriend buried within her own home. What began as a story of a beloved educator soon unraveled into one of the most chilling crimes the community had ever seen. A tale of love, deceit, and the darkness no one saw coming. Fiona Beale had always seemed like the kind of teacher every parent wished their child could have. Her students described her as gentle, encouraging, and endlessly patient. She had a soft voice that carried warmth, and her classroom was a safe haven for children who struggled to learn or fit in. Fiona decorated her room with colorful quotes about kindness and perseverance, creating an atmosphere that radiated comfort. She attended school plays, stayed late to help with projects, and always remembered birthdays. To her co-workers, she was the quiet one, reserved, dependable, and always polite. Nobody ever suspected that behind her calm smile was a life teetering on the edge of something sinister. Fiona lived in a modest house on a quiet suburban street. Her garden was neat, her curtains always drawn in perfect symmetry. Neighbors described her as friendly but distant, a woman who preferred solitude after long days surrounded by children. She lived with her boyfriend, David Miller, a handyman who was as outgoing as she was private. They had been together for several years, and to anyone who saw them, they looked like a happy couple. They waved to neighbors, occasionally hosted barbecues, and seemed like an ordinary pair living an ordinary life. But in the privacy of their home, cracks had begun to form. Arguments became more frequent, and Fiona's once bright demeanor began to dim. At school, she started to change in small but noticeable ways. The smile that used to come so easily became forced. Her colorful clothes were replaced with dull tones of gray and black. Her once organized classroom began to feel cold and empty. Posters came down, plants wilted, and students sensed something was wrong. When colleagues asked if she was feeling all right, Fiona always had an excuse: tiredness, stress, or just too much work. But her eyes, once full of compassion, had grown distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. As weeks turned into months, Fiona's social circle began to shrink. She no longer met friends for coffee or joined colleagues after school events. Instead, she spent her evenings alone in her home, writing in a journal that no one else ever saw. Neighbors noticed lights flickering late at night, sometimes long after midnight. David's car was often parked outside, but he was rarely seen. Some assumed he worked long hours. Others thought perhaps the couple had grown apart. Nobody imagined the truth that was slowly taking shape inside that quiet house. Then one morning, Fiona simply didn't show up to work. There had been no warning, no call, no message. Her absence sent ripples through the school community. It was unlike her. She had never missed a day without notice. At first, everyone assumed she was ill or had taken a sudden trip. Days passed, and her phone went straight to voicemail. Concerned colleagues left messages that went unanswered. Parents began asking questions, and rumors started to spread. The once bustling classroom sat empty, papers scattered across the desk as if she had left in a hurry. A neighbor, an elderly woman who often chatted with Fiona over the fence, began to grow uneasy. She hadn't seen Fiona or David for days, and an odd, sour smell had started to seep from the vents along the side of the house. She tried knocking on the door, but no one answered. The silence was heavy, unnatural. Eventually, she called the police to request a welfare check. When officers arrived, the front yard looked peaceful, almost staged, flowers still blooming, mail neatly stacked by the door. But as soon as they stepped inside, the air shifted. The house felt strangely untouched, like a picture frozen in time. The living room was clean but eerily quiet. There was a faint odor that grew stronger as they moved deeper inside. Everything seemed normal until they reached the basement door, sealed shut with layers of duct tape. When they cut it open, a blast of foul air escaped, and what lay beyond it would reveal a truth that no one in the community could ever forget. The teacher everyone loved had been living with a secret far darker than anyone could have imagined. When the officers descended the narrow basement stairs, they were met with an overwhelming stench of decay that clung to the air like poison. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of boxes, old furniture, and an oddly constructed wall at the far end of the room. The bricks looked newer than the rest, uneven and hastily sealed with fresh cement. One officer tapped it with his baton, and the hollow sound that echoed back confirmed what they feared. Behind that wall was something hidden, something terrible. Within hours, the quiet street became a crime scene, swarmed by police cars, forensic vans, and shocked neighbors peering from their windows. The discovery made national headlines. The body found behind the wall was identified as David Miller, Fiona Beale's boyfriend, missing for over 6 months. The revelation tore through the community like wildfire. Parents whispered at school gates, unable to process how the woman they'd trusted with their children's education could be capable of something so monstrous. Teachers who had worked beside Fiona replayed every conversation, every smile, every moment she had seemed off, searching for signs they'd missed. The police investigation quickly revealed that Fiona had vanished days before the body was found, leaving behind her phone, her car, and a series of disturbing handwritten journals that painted a horrifying picture. Detectives combed through her belongings, piecing together fragments of her private life. The journals were filled with meticulous notes, her emotions, her frustrations, her resentment toward David, and finally, her plan to end his life. She wrote in calm, deliberate sentences, as if outlining a project rather than confessing to murder. The entries described how she had grown suspicious that David was unfaithful, how his words had become cruel, and how she had convinced herself that he deserved what was coming. Each page revealed a woman unraveling, but doing so with chilling control. Neighbors were interviewed one by one. Some recalled hearing faint noises at night, dragging sounds, the hammering of tools, the occasional thud, but had dismissed them as normal household repairs. Others said Fiona had seemed unusually calm in the days following David's disappearance, even telling one neighbor that he had gone away for work. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the kind, soft-spoken teacher with the reality of a calculated killer. The contradiction was unbearable. She had attended parent-teacher meetings, graded essays, and smiled in school photos, all while concealing a body beneath her own home. As forensic teams worked to gather evidence, they uncovered the grim details of how the crime had been carried out. David had been attacked in the bedroom, likely while asleep. The evidence suggested premeditation. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no random act of violence. Fiona had planned it, executed it, and then gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. She had built the false wall herself, using materials purchased over several weeks, each item bought from different stores to avoid suspicion. Her precision was frightening. It wasn't the work of someone in panic, but of someone following a methodical plan. Police issued a nationwide search for Fiona Beale. Her disappearance added another layer of mystery. Some speculated she had fled abroad. Others believed she might have taken her own life. Her family was silent, refusing interviews, and the school district released a brief statement expressing shock and sorrow. The story dominated every news channel, turning Fiona's face into a symbol of deception. The image of the smiling teacher became haunting, a reminder that evil can wear a mask of kindness. Weeks later, investigators received a tip about a woman matching Fiona's description, staying in a remote cottage on the coast. When they arrived, they found her alone, surrounded by stacks of notebooks and personal belongings. She didn't resist arrest. Her demeanor was eerily calm, her eyes distant, as if she had already accepted what was coming. As she was led away, officers noticed the faintest trace of a smile, a quiet, knowing expression that sent chills down their spines. The woman the community had once adored had become a ghost of her former self, consumed by the darkness she had created. And though David Miller's body was finally laid to rest, the questions about what drove Fiona Beale to kill were only just beginning. Investigators spent weeks trying to understand what had transformed Fiona Beale from a dedicated teacher into a meticulous murderer. The journals found in her home were the key. Each entry peeled back another layer of her mind, exposing a gradual descent into obsession and delusion. At first, her writing focused on ordinary details, lesson plans, student progress, weekend errands. But slowly, darker thoughts began to surface. She wrote about feeling invisible, unappreciated, and increasingly controlled by David. She described moments of humiliation that seemed small on their own but had festered inside her, twisting into something unrecognizable. What began as quiet resentment evolved into a dangerous fixation on regaining control. Through her words, investigators saw how carefully she planned every step. Fiona had recorded dates, times, and methods, writing with the same precision she once used for her classroom notes. She outlined how she would isolate David, what tools she would need, and even how to dispose of evidence. It wasn't a sudden outburst of emotion, but a slow, methodical decision she had convinced herself was justified. She wrote about wanting peace and closure, words that took on chilling meaning once the crime was uncovered. She convinced herself that ending David's life would end her suffering too. Forensic analysis revealed she had spent months preparing. Purchases of cement, plastic sheeting, and construction tools were traced back to her using receipts found in her drawer. Fiona had made sure to buy items from different stores to avoid suspicion. Neighbors remembered deliveries arriving at odd hours, but since Fiona was always polite and quiet, no one questioned her intentions. When the night finally came, her plan unfolded exactly as she had written. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of panic. Everything suggested David never saw it coming. After the crime, Fiona's behavior was astonishingly composed. She continued to go to work, grading papers and smiling at students. She baked cupcakes for a school fundraiser just days after concealing David's body in the basement. Her ability to separate her everyday persona from the horrific reality of what she had done baffled even seasoned detectives. It was as if she had compartmentalized her life, locking away the guilt behind a mask of normalcy. The more investigators learned, the more chilling it became. Fiona Beale wasn't driven by madness in the traditional sense. She was coldly logical, operating with unsettling calmness. Psychological experts later described her as a functional sociopath, someone who could mimic empathy, but felt detached from real emotion. Her journal supported this idea. Instead of remorse, her entries after the murder focused on maintaining her secret. She wrote about cleaning, about teaching, about making sure no one noticed anything strange. One line in particular haunted investigators. "If I can keep my classroom calm, I can keep my mind calm." Those words showed the dual life she lived, teacher by day, concealer of a crime by night. When Fiona disappeared, she left behind one final entry dated just days before she fled. In it, she wrote about feeling watched, about her secret cracking under the weight of guilt. Yet even in that moment, she didn't express regret for what she had done. Instead, she wrote about the fear of being discovered and the loss of control she had tried so hard to preserve. It was as if she viewed exposure as the true tragedy, not the life she had taken. The prosecution later used these journals as evidence of premeditation. They weren't the writings of a woman pushed to her breaking point in a moment of chaos. They were the careful confessions of someone who had chosen her path long before the act itself. Fiona Beale had built her life around control. Control in the classroom, control in her relationships, and finally, control over life and death. But when that control began to unravel, she turned to the one act that could never be undone. By the time police finally caught up to her, she had become a hollow reflection of who she once was. consumed by the very darkness she thought she could master. When Fiona Beale was brought into custody, her composure stunned everyone in the interrogation room. She sat upright, hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. There were no tears, no frantic attempts to defend herself. When officers read her the charges, she only nodded, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. Detectives had prepared for denial or outrage, but Fiona gave them neither. Instead, she spoke with unsettling calm, describing her actions with precision, never once faltering. To those who listened, it was as though she were explaining a lesson plan, not confessing to murder. Her lack of emotion was more disturbing than any words she said. The written evidence spoke for itself. Her journals outlined every step of her crime, from the planning stages to the concealment of the body. They were written neatly in her familiar looping handwriting, the same penmanship she used for her students' homework feedback. The pages were filled with matter-of-fact language. No remorse, no hesitation, only detailed reflections on how to stay unnoticed. Psychological evaluators were called in to assess her mental state. What they found was chilling. Fiona Beale was entirely aware of what she had done, and she understood it was wrong. Yet she felt no empathy for her victim, only a quiet pride in her ability to maintain control. During her trial, the courtroom overflowed with spectators. Parents, former students, teachers, and journalists filled every seat, straining to get a glimpse of the woman who had become a national headline. Fiona appeared in court wearing a plain gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, her face pale but composed. She looked more like a teacher preparing for a presentation than a murderer facing life imprisonment. When the prosecution began reading excerpts from her journals aloud, the silence in the room was suffocating. Each line revealed another layer of her detached cruelty. Her fascination with the process, her self-justification, her belief that she had restored some form of balance by ending David's life. The defense attempted to portray her as mentally unwell, citing emotional abuse and psychological deterioration. They argued that years of manipulation had driven her to the breaking point. But the evidence of premeditation was impossible to ignore. Fiona had not acted in a moment of passion. She had planned every detail, written it down, and carried it out with precision. The prosecution emphasized her clear-headed execution and her disturbing calm afterward. They called her a woman who played the role of victim while secretly orchestrating her revenge. As the trial continued, the public's fascination turned to horror. The teacher they had once trusted to guide children had become a symbol of hidden evil. News outlets replayed her classroom photos, contrasting them with courtroom sketches of her expressionless face. Parents who had once praised her kindness now struggled to explain to their children why their beloved teacher was behind bars. The shock rippled far beyond the town where she had lived, sparking debates about how well anyone can truly know another person. When Fiona finally addressed the court, her words were brief and cold. She acknowledged her actions, but refused to elaborate on her motives. She did not apologize to David's family, nor did she express sorrow. Her tone was steady, almost academic, as if she were describing someone else's crime. The judge noted her lack of remorse as a defining element of her sentencing. Reporters described her as emotionless and clinical and eerily detached. Every gesture, every word seemed deliberate, controlled, and void of humanity. The verdict came swiftly, guilty of premeditated murder. As the sentence was read, Fiona did not flinch. She stood quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. In that moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for some sign of regret, some crack in her composure. But there was nothing. She was escorted away, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor, leaving behind only silence and disbelief. Afterward, jurors described feeling haunted by the experience. Some said it wasn't just the crime that disturbed them, but Fiona's calm acceptance of it. Her story became the subject of countless documentaries and news specials. each trying to uncover what could drive a seemingly kind woman to commit such evil. But no matter how deeply experts analyzed her psyche, one truth remained. Fiona Beale had built her life on control, and even in the face of judgment, she never let it go. Fiona Beale's sentencing marked the end of the trial, but not the end of the horror that lingered over her town. The community she had once been a part of was left fractured, struggling to make sense of how someone so ordinary, so trusted, could conceal such darkness. Her school remained closed for months, its hallways empty, the colorful student artwork still hanging untouched on the walls. The classroom that had once been filled with laughter was now sealed off, transformed into a chilling reminder of the woman who had stood at its front. Parents refused to let their children speak her name, and teachers avoided discussing her altogether. It was as if the entire town had decided to erase Fiona Beale from their memory, but no matter how hard they tried, her shadow remained. Reporters swarmed the area, documenting the fallout. Fiona's neighbors described sleepless nights and uneasy silences. The house where she had hidden David's body was fenced off, awaiting demolition. No one wanted to live near it, and real estate agents refused to list it for sale. When the bulldozers finally arrived, crowds gathered at a distance, watching as the walls that had concealed her crime crumbled to dust. Yet even as the house disappeared, the unease persisted. The land itself seemed stained by what had happened there. Some said they could still feel something wrong in the air, a heaviness that refused to fade. Inside prison, Fiona Beale maintained the same composure that had defined her during the trial. She followed routines precisely, never caused trouble, and spoke politely to guards. She spent hours in the library, reading and writing, though no one knew what she was putting down on paper. Her letters to the outside world were brief and impersonal, often about daily schedules or prison policies, never about remorse or reflection. She was serving a life sentence, yet she acted as though she were still in control of something unseen. Psychologists who interviewed her found her responses unnerving. She described her actions as necessary and insisted that she had accepted the consequences, even behind bars. Fiona Beale remained an enigma, neither fully repentant nor overtly defiant, existing in a strange middle ground between denial and detachment. For David Miller's family, justice brought little comfort. They had spent months searching for him, clinging to hope before learning the truth. The knowledge that he had been buried beneath the home he shared with Fiona was unbearable. His mother never spoke publicly, but those close to her said she never recovered from the loss. David's friends described him as kind and hard-working, someone who trusted too easily. His name faded from the headlines, replaced by Fiona's as though even in death, his identity had been overshadowed by the woman who destroyed him. Years passed, but the case continued to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and journalists. Documentaries dissected every detail, each trying to uncover the moment when Fiona's humanity fractured. Was it emotional abuse, mental illness, or a deep-seated darkness that had always been there? Experts debated endlessly, but no single explanation could satisfy the public. Fiona's crime had crossed an invisible line. It wasn't born from passion or panic, but from a cold and deliberate choice. That truth unsettled people because it suggested that evil could exist quietly, behind the face of someone ordinary. The town eventually rebuilt itself, but certain places carried memories that couldn't be erased. Children who once sat in Fiona's classroom grew up remembering the day the news broke. Teachers who had worked beside her still struggled with guilt, wondering how they hadn't seen the signs. Her story became a cautionary tale whispered among new staff members, a reminder that even those who appear the most composed can be hiding something monstrous. Fiona Beale's name became a symbol of betrayal, her legacy one of fear and disbelief. She had been a teacher, a mentor, a figure of trust, and she had shattered that trust in the most horrifying way possible. Her crime did more than take a life. It tore apart a community's sense of safety, Long after her house was gone and her story faded from the news cycle, the unease remained. In that quiet suburban town, people still locked their doors a little earlier, glanced twice at their neighbors, and remembered that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile, they teach, they help, and they blend in until the truth finally comes to light. Fiona Beale had done more than commit a murder. She had rewritten the town's understanding of evil forever.